Hi, it's Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com.au, where we provide tailor-made solutions for long-term ventilated patients with tracheostomy by improving their quality of life, and where we also provide tailor-made solutions to hospital and intensive care units to save money and resources whilst providing quality care. In last week's blog, I shared best practice guidelines for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy at home. You can check out last week's blog by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's blog, I want to share how to select the best options when your loved one is stuck in ICU on a ventilator with tracheostomy. Let's face it, the number of patients in intensive care requiring ventilation with tracheostomy is on the rise. As the population is getting older and more lives are saved in an intensive care environment after critical illness, the number of people ending up on a ventilator with tracheostomy in intensive care is increasing. As the number of people requiring long-term ventilation with tracheostomy is increasing, hospitals, intensive care units, patients and families are also realizing that they are dealing with a real dilemma, and the issues are manifold, and they include and are not limited to lack of quality of life for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomy in a sterile, depressing and institutionalized intensive care unit. Also, families of long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies spend day and night in intensive care, putting their lives on hold to be with their loved ones, and they often experience massive stress, feel vulnerable and often take unpaid time off work. Also, intensive care units waste a lot of taxpayers' money by spending around $5,000 per bed day, only to find that they unnecessarily keep long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in intensive care. Intensive care units do this in spite of the fact that other first world countries have addressed this issue by providing intensive home care services such as intensive care at home. Also, long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies unnecessarily block beds in already overcrowded intensive care units where beds are scarce, in demand, precious and expensive. With these facts in mind, a paradigm shift to intensive home care is the right approach, and if you are watching this and you have a loved one in intensive care who's requiring long-term ventilation with tracheostomy, you should be making up your own mind whether a long-term stay in intensive care is the right approach for your loved one and for your family. Our experience certainly has shown that long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies and their families have a much improved quality of life, and in some instances an improved quality of end of life. Intensive care at home is an accredited intensive home care nursing service, and we follow the principles of the home mechanical ventilation guidelines. Those guidelines are the framework for successfully looking after long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in a home care environment. Those guidelines have been developed more than 10 years ago in Germany, where intensive home care services for long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies are the rule and not the exception. Our service operates and follows those principles, and we exclusively work with critical care trained nursing staff in order to make a seamless transition from intensive care to home. We strongly recommend that if your loved one feels trapped in ICU because of their ventilator dependency, that you should contact us. Now, you might ask, who's going to pay for the service? The answer is simple. As intensive care units and hospitals continue to waste huge amounts of money by continuing to spend up to $5,000 per bed day whilst your loved one is in ICU on a ventilator, hospitals, intensive care units, departments of health and private health funds have an interest in reducing their massive expenses when it comes to long-term ventilated adults and children with tracheostomies in intensive care units. Therefore, the pressure is back on hospitals, intensive care units, departments of health and private health funds to fund our services in order to save their precious resources and also reduce their waiting lists by freeing up their precious beds in intensive care. Intensive care at home therefore provides a win-win solution for all stakeholders. What are your thoughts? Do you think that your loved one should stay in intensive care for weeks or months on end if they are long-term ventilated with tracheostomy? You should leave your comments on the blog or contact me on 041 094 2230 or email me at patrick@intensivecareathome.com.au. Please also note that we are preferred provider for Queensland Health. And please also note that we're currently hiring enthusiastic and experienced intensive care nurses with critical care certificate for a ventilated client in Melbourne close to the CBD. You can also check out our career section for more information. Thank you for tuning into this week's blog. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecareathome.com.au, and I'll see you again in another update next week.